We've been in this sermon series in Advent, and Advent basically means this idea of coming, the idea that God Himself actually enters our world. And it's quite beautiful because throughout the church, around the world, and throughout time, they've encountered different themes, and last week the theme of hope, especially hope as an antidote for the longing of the human spirit. Whether you're a Christian or you're not here, every single one of us has these longings that we carry. What does it mean for Jesus and the Christian faith to be something that is an antidote to that longing for hope that we all look for? Now today, the word that we're going to be focusing on is peace. Can I hear you say peace?
Peace.
That's right. Peace is this idea of, and you're going to hear more about it. And in fact, in the passage that we read earlier today, in Luke chapter 2, check this out. This is what it says. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people." Now, do you get what's happening here? They're in some kind of no-name field, and there's shepherds there. Shepherds aren't people of repute. In fact, they're probably these no-name, bottom-of-the-rung social class in the midst of like some sort of desert, arid-looking place. And somehow, this incredible revelation comes to them. And this news that I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. Now, already you get all the vestiges of kind of this subversive message of Christmas. That the message of Jesus coming into the world, that God is with us, but yet coming in a manger, a baby clothed in a manger amongst cow dung and horses and hay and whatever else. Now, isn't that startling? We already get this sense like there's something going down, but it doesn't come down in the way that we might expect, or with the pageantry, or the lights, or all the flair of Christmas that New York does so well. And look at what happened. Suddenly, a great company of the heavenly host appeared with the angel, praising God and saying this: "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace." Can I hear you say peace?
Peace.
Peace to those on whom His favor rests. Now, the word for peace in the Greek is the word irene. Can I hear you say irene?
Irene.
That's right. And irene is actually a word in Greek that is actually translates from the Hebrew word shalom. Can I say shalom?
Shalom.
Now, shalom is this word that means peace, but it's very different because this word shalom, which means peace in the Hebrew as well as irene, it's translated as peace, but it actually has a much different connotation than what many of us might think about conventionally. Like, for instance, in a geopolitical sense, we might say, oh, there's peace between these nations right now. And basically, that peace basically means they're not at war with one another. Or I can say this, for instance, in my household. Well, there's peace in our household right now. And some of you kind of, what immediately comes to mind is, they're not fighting that much. Right? I mean, that's kind of the idea of peace. But here's where shalom is so different, and where irene is so different. And peace doesn't necessarily get at the fundamental heart of the word, because shalom is this word that means flourishing and wholeness. And it's a word that means that it's not only the absence of conflict, it has a very much this sense like there's this positive, overflowing sense of flourishing that exists. So whenever someone from a Jewish background, for instance, says Shabbat Shalom, they're not just talking about the Shabbat, Sabbath. Shalom is this word for like absence of conflict, but instead it's a word that says, like, what I wish for you on Sabbath is this day of flourishing, of wholeness. So the same thing in my marriage, right? If I basically say, oh, our marriage is at peace right now, there's a difference between saying that and for us to kind of get this, okay, they're not fighting that much, they're not in conflict. But what if I were to say our marriage is in shalom right now, and what it means is that us as a couple is flourishing. There's this sense of in-loveness and a sense of passion that we have for one another, where people are like, guys, keep your hands off one another. Or guys, the days of when early on in a relationship, when you're just head over heels for someone, there's a quality of our relationship. When we're talking about shalom in a relationship, there's a way that it's flourishing so much that it ends up affecting the people around us, that it elevates everyone around us, that it has this sense of wholeness, flourishing of life, of joy, of all of these different elements. That, you see, there's different levels to this peace thing. It's not only just the absence of conflict, it's actually a kind of flourishing that's offered. Now, that word shalom or irony is actually offered to the people of God. Like, this shalom is available to you and to me and to all of us who claim to follow Jesus. Now, here's the thing, though, about shalom. Because if you know anything about the story of Israel, check out some of these different themes that exist throughout their story. There's theme of enslavement and exodus. There's themes of wandering and conflict. There's a wandering that happens in the Sinai Peninsula. And in that midst of wandering, they're wondering, God, where are you? There's also themes of captivity and exile from Assyria and Babylon over centuries. And then, of course, even in the time of Jesus, there's themes of oppression and occupation. That Rome basically is subjugating the people of Israel. Now, if you can imagine this then, like, the people of Israel they're not kind of novices to this idea of pain and suffering and difficulty. But in fact, it's in the midst of challenging circumstances, of captivity, of exile, of wandering, that it's in that context that this word shalom is offered to be a controlling word for the people of God. Now, isn't that extraordinary? In other words, shalom is offered to us not when things are up and to the right and things look really great, but it's actually offered to us in the midst of some of the most trying circumstances, the valleys that every single human being goes through at one point or another, the struggles, the longings for God. And so this peace, when the Christmas story comes, it comes in the midst of basically, when everything feels like it's going crazy, it's in that moment that the word is, peace has come for all of those who want it. And today, whatever you might be going through, there's a peace that is offered to you and to me. Now, what's interesting is Isaiah, who's a prophet. Well, here's actually a picture, before we get into that. Here's a picture of a desert. And this is a desert in the Sinai Peninsula. You can imagine, has anyone ever been stranded in a desert before? Karen, only person, wow. Well, neither have I. I haven't been stranded in a desert either. But what I've heard by watching reality shows, what I found out about basically being stranded in a desert, we're wondering, where's our meal going to come from? What are we going to do in this dry land? Where are we going to get enough water? Which way is which? And if you can even see the image of this desert, right? Like, there's a sense of wandering. I don't know which way to go. I don't know how I'm going to make it. I don't know how I'm going to survive. Now, it's actually this image, this theme of wandering, like I mentioned, that exists constantly throughout the scriptures. This theme of, like, I feel so disoriented. I don't know what's next. Have anyone ever been there before? Have you ever been in a desert before? A proverbial one in which you were wandering and figuring out whether or not you were going to make it. And yet, it's this image that comes to us when it comes to this idea of peace that is available to you and to me. The prophet Isaiah, in the midst of a people who are undergoing captivity and exile, check out what Isaiah offers to the people of God. Now look what he says, you will keep in perfect shalom. Here's that word. Again, it's not just the absence of conflict. You will keep in perfect shalom all of those everyone is healthy in your family, and you've made a lot of money this past year. That's the people that you will keep in perfect shalom. Is that what it says? You will keep in perfect shalom everyone who is just in perfect health and their family relationships are all intact right now. No, it doesn't say that. Notice it has nothing to do with circumstances. It says you will keep in perfect shalom those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. In other words, there's a kind of shalom that is offered to you and to me that transcends what we go through day to day. There's something that's offered to you and to me that we can hold on to that is much truer and greater than anything that perhaps the world can offer today. Now, you know what's interesting is that Isaiah would actually write in another passage about where this transcendent shalom come from. Here's a passage, Isaiah chapter 9. He says, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given. See, Isaiah would give this prophetic word about how the promise of God's shalom would come to the world. And look what he says, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. shalom. That perhaps that same fundamental longing in the midst of wandering, that longing for shalom, that every human being has at one point or another. And today it can be found in the person of Jesus. You see, and that's the story of Christmas reality. And Jesus has come to offer us a peace that in the midst of whatever we're going through, there's a peace that only Jesus can give and that the world can never take away. Now here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to hear from some of our colleagues, and we're going to have some chairs set up right now. And colleagues or friends or church family, I don't know why I called you guys colleagues, but nevertheless, I thought it'd be really wonderful for us to be able to hear from his friends about stories of wandering that they experienced in their own life and journey, and ways in which God's peace has become very real to them. So I'm going to invite you guys up right now. We're going to have Cathy, Brian, and Evelyn. Hey, let's give it up for you guys. Thank you. All right. Thanks, guys, for being here and for your willingness to share your stories. And why don't we first, we'll just go down the line. We'll just go ahead and just share our names, maybe how long we've been part of the whole family here.
I'm Cathy Moore. I've been here for 4 or 5 years.
I'm Yoon. I'm here for like 7 months.
That's it, 7 months. That's amazing. Yeah.
Evelyn and Yanyuk, I've been becoming a host since April, so around the same with Ryan.
That's awesome. Awesome, guys. Well, so glad to have you guys. And, we've been talking about this theme of wandering, and it's a very fundamental human experience of wandering. And I would just love to hear from you guys, like, your own story of wandering, especially as it relates to life, purpose, the lack of peace, whatever that might look like for you. So, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in church. I was always, I grew up in church every Sunday with my family. I was very involved at a very young age in the children's groups and really loved God when I was really young. And as I got older, something just kind of shifted. And around in high school and college, I just decided that I didn't really want to make God a priority in my life anymore. And so I still believed in God, and I still prayed here and there, but I just didn't really want to live my life for God. And just kind of wanted to live in this world and experience life and, do what I wanted to do. And so I kind of stuck out through high school and college, and I was going out and drinking most nights of the week, and it was a very unfulfilling life. And it was just kind of the same thing every week. You didn't really feel like you had much of a purpose. And I still believed in, God this whole time. I just didn't have that strong relationship. And so I felt kind of like I was living sort of 2 lives, who I was to my friends, to people around me, and then who I was kind of behind closed doors at night when I would pray. And so I really struggled with this a lot. And I remember in my freshman year of college, I was walking around campus, from campus to my dorm, and someone had stopped me. He started sharing about this Christian organization that he was part of, and asked if I wanted to join. I was like, oh, this is so great. And we exchanged numbers, and he would reach out. He would let me know whatever the meetings were, and he would just reach out and ask how I was doing. He was just so friendly and so nice. And I just didn't really prioritize it, so I never ended up going. And then in my sophomore year, I was just fighting this battle internally of, do I live my life for God or for this world? I don't see anyone around me living life for God. I didn't have any Christian friends at all. And so it was really hard to imagine my life living life for God. What friends would I lose? How do I have to live life differently? And in my sophomore year, I was praying, and that I could find some Christian friends, find a Christian community. And the very next day in class, and I went to a very large university. This was one of the small classes that I was in, and there's someone wearing a Crew t-shirt, and so I'm sure many of you are familiar with Crew, Christian organization on campus. And I was like, this is a sign from God. I just prayed, last night, and I have to approach him. So at the end of class, I went up to him, and we started talking, and he was extremely friendly. He was sharing about the organization, and we exchanged numbers, and He would invite me to whenever they were meeting, and again, I just never went. I just never prioritized it. And there's always something else, and I was always afraid, like, what would my friends think? It was just totally different. And so I never went. And in my junior and senior year, I just really had this conflict of, what do I want for my life? Like, what is my goal? And I realized that the things that I wanted in my life, I wasn't living that way. I was living totally opposite. And so I realized that, I had to start making changes. And so I was praying more. And then the pandemic happened. And so that was a time for me to really be alone and, in my thoughts. And in that moment, I really decided I want to start living my life for God and prioritizing God and making Him number one in my life. And so it's like right after that, I just started becoming so curious about God, so curious about who Jesus was when He walked this earth. And it was this feeling that I never really had before, but it was this deep curiosity. And the more that I learned about God and Jesus and who Jesus was when He was on this earth, the more that I just fell in love with Him. And truly realized that this is the life that I want to live. And I just experienced so much peace and fulfillment and joy rather than how I was living before, just with happiness based off of circumstances and things were good. But now it's just this deep joy that you feel even when things aren't going right. I know that it's not my greater purpose in this world. If things are stressful at work, I know that that's not my purpose, but it's God, and so it's given me a lot of peace and joy.
So, it's amazing. Thanks. How about you, Brian? Your story of wandering?
Well, actually, a very similar story to Evelyn. I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, but I think my story of faith and wandering has always been interesting because a lot of it is tied to how my parents kind of instilled faith in my life. Coming from Korea as an immigrant, I think the way how I approach God in my entire life hasn't always functional in a way that's practical. So my parents worked late nights and going to church and meeting out with friends and doing prayers was almost a ritualistic way for them to ease up and kind of digest their busy lives. And for me, that's kind of how I approach my life in terms of faith. And so it was almost legalistic in the sense that I grew up just going to church functionally, was involved as an altar server boy, and I didn't really understand the process, what that really meant for my life. And as I grew up, and my head got very big, and I had a huge ego by my senior year, I was like, this is not for me. I'm too smart for church, all these things, these processes don't really mean much to me. And I think at the heart of it was because, I never really had a relationship with God. And so I think that process of letting go of that, I just let myself wander and let the things of the world really take priority in my life. And so, similar to the story, I really lived for the instant gratification of things, right? So, in college, I think I was a hooligan. But, as my small remembers right now. And so I think there was a point in which I really felt like I lost myself in my sophomore year as well, when a lot of my friends really started to call me out and say, hey, is this really the right path that you want to be on? And I think the first person that really reached out to me was my Christian peers that I never really met, but they were so nice to me and really being so open and understanding and willing to listen to my story. And I think that was the first time I felt anchored to some level of truth that I felt like I wasn't lost anymore. That's really it.
That's right. Hooligan. Cathy, let's hear from you. What's your wandering?
Alright. So I also grew up in the church. And when I was 20 years old, I got married. And when I was 28, my husband decided he did not want to be married anymore. And it broke me to pieces. I had always kind of had things together. I was, trying to be a good Christian girl, and then this happened, and everything just fell to pieces, and I felt empty. I didn't know who I was. I kind of lost my personality for several years. I started absorbing everything around me because I didn't have anything inside of me. That's how it feels. Because of that, I absorbed all the things I had heard at church, and so every time I was told that I should be doing this or that, I absorbed it and I tried to do it all. But I also absorbed the worldly things in my life as well, and so I got into some very unhealthy patterns. I was getting drunk a lot. It wasn't because I wanted to get drunk. I really am not a very party person. I just was hanging out with people and didn't know how to drink yet. So I got drunk a lot, but that also got me in a lot of trouble. I started sleeping around with guys a lot, and I thought it was fine. It was very different than the way I grew up. I knew I wasn't supposed to do that, but I kind of was questioning everything that I had learned before, because it seemed like I wasn't in the pathway that I was supposed to be in, or that I was outside of things, and so I kind of could just do anything. So after a year and a half, it started to get really bad. It started to get worse, and I noticed, and I didn't know what to do about it. I couldn't stop. I started telling people, because before I had these two lives, and I was very conflicted about it all. I did not have much peace. We were talking about peace. I had no peace. I was not whole. And so I started telling people, which helped. And everyone was like, just stop. Stop being trying to stop sleeping with people. And I told them I couldn't, I can't. And they didn't understand. Finally, I came across this one girl who heard what I had to say and said, that is spiritual oppression. And so she prayed over me this extremely powerful prayer that I'd never heard of before. I don't remember the words, but she invited me to her place that Saturday. We prayed for 2 hours. It was just regular praying, but I prayed for God to forgive me of all the things that I had been doing. I felt after that 2 hours that all of this, this yuck inside of me just drained out through my feet. And from then on, I was healed. I didn't have to do these things anymore. I don't understand it, but I have been fascinated by the Holy Spirit ever since. I want to understand this power of the spiritual realm that is very real. There are real characteristics of the spiritual realm. It's not just this ethereal thing that we sometimes talk about in some churches. He's real. And also throughout this time, I was able to hear the Lord's voice more than I'd ever heard him before. And it was really, really special that he was there and comforting me, telling me that he loved me, despite everything that I had done.
Thank you, Cathy. Hey, just some quick news about Cathy as well. She and her new fiance, Pete, are just right over there. They just got engaged recently. So that was really meant to embarrass Pete because I didn't know that I could imagine him. Really love you guys, and thank you for sharing your own story of wandering. I would love to hear from you guys. There are people here who might be the season of wandering themselves. Maybe it's the season of depression, or just questions around suffering, or even questions of faith. What would you guys say would be most helpful to someone who's in a season of wandering?
Yeah, I would say first thing I think the most important is seeking community. And I think for me, when I was in the season of the deep wilderness of wandering, I think that I really felt alone. And I felt like, there's no one that I could really talk to, and I just wasn't sure who to go to for advice, and I felt very alone in that season. And I think it's just so important just to bring yourself around community, whether it's a small group or Christian friends, just bring yourself around people, and I think seeing the way that other Christians are living their lives has been so inspiring for me, and seeing that people are doing this, people have so much joy, and made me so curious of this happiness that Christians have, and I wanted to experience that. But I think having community around you is so important.
I think for me, it ultimately came down to really giving yourself some space to really digest and reflect and allow yourself to kind of dwell in that period of wandering and understand, that you were broken at that time. And I think in many ways we can just be so caught up with just living our busy lives and just not really processing what's really happening. And I think for me, having time to really reflect, really process it on your end, and getting to a level where you're comfortable enough to share with, if you have a close group of community that Evelyn alluded to, and just being vulnerable and letting your voice be heard at that time, and really just being honest with your feelings. I think for me it was the best way to kind of let others come into my life so that they could bless over me and to become almost accountable partners that could really push myself towards the right direction.
I would say the thing that I learned the most is that it is important to cry out to the Father, to talk directly to Him, not just about Him, and not just like, oh, I'm a Christian, so I'm already talking to God in my heart, but like to actually use words and like asking questions. And sometimes we hear back. Some people hear back all the time, some people hear back sometimes. And if you haven't ever heard back, it's always the first time. That He is here. He is here right now. And He cares for us. He loves us. It doesn't matter what you've done, what you've been through, who you are. He wants to talk to you. I think that's why the main reason He died on the cross was to connect us to the Father and to Himself and His Spirit. So take advantage of and wait for His answers.
Yeah, so it sounds like connecting with God and finding peace in Him, and then like a helpful community and stuff. And I would just love to add some texture to the piece about community. Because was there any way that in the midst of your wandering where some people were unhelpful and some people were helpful? I would love to hear, for friends perhaps who are kind of journeying with people who are in seasons of wandering, what is unhelpful help look like? What is helpful in the midst of that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Honestly, I think in that time I didn't have many Christian friends throughout college and throughout high school that I was very close with, that I felt comfortable, sharing what I was truly going through. And I think it's so important to seek advice from your Christian friends, your friends that believe in God, that Jesus is their Savior. Seeking advice from them. I think when I would seek advice from other people, it was very misleading, and I found myself getting more hurt and getting more lost. So I think seeking that advice.
Yeah, Brian and Cathy, what you guys?
It's a hard question.
Yeah.
I think even within Christians, it can be misleading, and I think there are certain friends that think they know Scripture enough to kind of just give you an answer, and I feel like in those cases, that doesn't really get to the heart of the problem, right? In many ways, for me, the issue is that I did not have a personal relationship with God, and so no one can really imbue a relationship to me. And so I think ultimately it was finding other people's stories, listening to them, digesting it, and really reaching out myself through prayer, through QT, really digesting that process of wandering was, just more helpful to me than taking just everything else.
Yeah, so it sounds like people that journeyed with you, that pointed you to Jesus, it sounds like. Yeah, how about you, Cathy?
was like throwing truths at you from the Bible without really connecting with you. I think there's something about ministry where it's really kind of get a little bit in the buck with them. Or else you kind of feel even more alone than they already are.
Mm. Oh, that's a great word. Would be the final question for you guys. And so, my wife's so nervous. I'd just love to hear, just kind of like, just as you have been in this season of wandering and the peace that's found in Jesus, what would you say you've learned about yourself in the midst of the wandering, as well as learn more about God and who God is? And I know there have been like little moments where you've hinted at some of those things, but what would you guys say to that?
Absolutely, that God is always chasing you. He's always after you. He always wants your heart. And in my seasons where I just turned away from God, and I didn't want Him to be a priority in my life, and He was still chasing after me. He still wanted my heart, and I think that is just so powerful. That even when you turn away from Him, He's still there. And so I think that He's always there. He always wants your heart. It's just the purest kind of love that there is.
Thank you. So good.
I think, similar to what Evelyn said, I think in many ways I felt like the more I found clarity within my wandering, I found God to be just an endless well of joy and where I can find flourishing. And I think many of us will continue to be lost and wander throughout our lives, and this won't be only peaks and troughs in our lives. And I think having that reminder in those times of the glimpses of the joy, of the flourishing, allows you to really tether to that. I think the faith grows every time. And so for me, I think keeping optimistic, keeping really hopeful, knowing that, I know I'm going to mess up, I know I'm going to fall again, but knowing that there is always an eternal loving Father, I think it's a very lovely thing.
Before I felt pain in my heart, I did not understand the gospel. I didn't understand the need for Him. And then once I had this awful pain, I realized that I needed God so much, and so the gospel came alive for me. Everything I'd been told since I was a little girl, that God was good, that God was love, and everything, all that meant something to me all of a sudden. And it surprised me because I felt guilty all the time. Mostly I thought it was the reason my marriage fell apart. And so I was so shocked that God was right here next to me. That He's always here. He's right there, ready to talk.
It's right there, ready to talk. Can we thank our panelists, everyone?